MarioKart.
Mario Kart Super Circuit is a game I've dreaded ever since my encounter with Mario Kart 64's underwhelming nature. But I suppose I can't delay the inevitable. I've tried doing that 5 times this week. I thought Super Mario Kart was impressive for the time, but it lacked anything that would make it a special and memorable experience. Mario Kart 64 was better. It transitioned the series into 3D quite smoothly, and had some pretty great tracks to coincide with it. But everything else about it, from the emptiness of its graphics to the okay controls, rubber banding, AI, and just the overall lack of things to do, made replaying this game very unmemorable. I like both of these games to a certain extent, but I'm most likely never going to want to play either of these unless I want to show my friends what bad Mario Kart looks like. I'm not man enough to face Hello Kitty Cruisers head on. But what if both of these games were combined into one great experience that takes what was good about these games and refines everything about them to make them a pleasurable experience? I'm of course talking about the rest of the Mario Kart series, Double Dash and beyond. Now Super Circuit, it's better than Super Mario Kart, but I could say the same thing about Ziploc bags. This is the Mario Kart game I've easily played the least, and can you really blame me? My guilty conscience says yes. This is one of the most forgettable first-party Nintendo games I've ever played, and I've seen Geist. This is the only point in the series that regressed it instead of pushing the mechanics of the games forward. I don't even have that much history with this game. It's a game that I happen to own and play from time to time. I don't have any real connection to it. Every other game in the series has something I can latch onto. We introduced the trick system, 8 brought in some anti-gravity mechanics, Double Dash had P.D. Piranha. All Super Circuit did was make me squint. Speaking of which, this was the first Mario Kart you could bust out on the back of the bus. And if I was anything other than a fetus at the time, I would have seen this as a big deal. I feel like portability has lost a bit of its magic over the years. I used to be super wowed by the fact that I could take my favorite game franchise wherever I went, until it became a part of the Dead and Berry Club. But now I find portability to be a bit of a novelty. Playing Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze at the funeral is really cool, but it isn't entirely necessary. I love the Nintendo Switch, allowing console quality games to be played anywhere you want. But after so long, I find that the console has to make quite a few concessions in order to keep it up. Portability is a really cool facet of the gaming industry. Many companies have dabbled in it, while Nintendo is over here embracing it like a religion. But over time, it seems that it's become less of a selling point and more of a personality trait. But what does Mario Kart have to do with this, you may be asking? Well, I believe each portable Mario Kart to be practically a symbol of what each handheld stands for, what they had going for them, and just their overall charm. I somewhat feel this with the console titles, but to a much lesser degree. The only one that I can truly say became one with its console was Mario Kart Wii, also known as the only one I'd pick out of a line of culprits. But every single one of these aligns with its console's ideals. Mario Kart 8 Deluxe is a Switch game. Mario Kart DS is a DS game. Super Mario Kart is a game on the SNES. But I feel like Super Circuit is the game that's focused on abiding by its console's agenda. This can be argued against though, because Super Circuit is one of the only pseudo 3D games to be on the platform. The SNES was chock full of them. For every block you had 5 more balls 3Ds. I'm just saying that this game can be viewed as the GBA game. It isn't an incredible masterpiece, but it represents everything that this console was at the end of the day, for better or for worse. The game was originally titled Mario Kart Advance, just as any good upstanding Mario Kart on the Game Boy Advance should be. But they got cold feet and changed it to Super Circuit, and personally, I'm ashamed. So let's see how long I can last. The most interesting thing about this game's development though, is that it was developed by Intelligent Systems. Yes, that Intelligent Systems. They've made some of the most memorable games and franchises out there, creating what I believe to be the pinnacle of RPGs. They also created this thing. This definitely was not their specialty, or it's at the very least the last thing that crosses my mind when Intelligent Systems does the same. They've done some pretty experimental titles over the years, and some dead ones, but racing games are almost nowhere to be found in their catalog, so why they were the primary candidate to develop a Mario Kart game for the GBA is beyond me. Now apparently they did need a bit of help from Rare, because because they just couldn't make the Donkey Kong model on their own. There were also rumors that a Mario Kart game was being worked on for the Virtual Boy. Now that thing nearly killed my entire family, stole my eyes, and made the opposite of profitable business. However, it wasn't the worst thing ever. Have you guys seen Politics? But this was the game that we got instead, so we're just gonna have to live with that fact. I know. This game is not a sequel to Mario Kart 64. It's a sequel to Super Mario Kart. This is plainly conveyed for it being one of the two-dimensional titles in the series. This game carries the same two-dimensional style as Super Mario Kart, which is all they could really do for the GBA. Being a portable equivalent to the SNES in terms of power, the GBA can very closely replicate this game's charm. Now, I don't think that it's a bad thing for the game to be in 2D, it's just that the series works far better in 3D. The series could work fine in a 2D style like this, and I'm not extremely disturbed by the game's graphics. This could have been a great entry in the series, bringing in awesome new tracks and great new mechanics. Now, if you're great at picking up context clues, you'll probably know what's coming up next. This game is so bland. It doesn't do anything interesting whatsoever. It's easily the safest entry in the series to a large fault. I sometimes like to coin 7 on being the safest Mario Kart because of its lack of originality and forgettable courses, but Super Circuit has the same problems and then some. It has the same character roster as 64. There are also no new items in this game, and that's a bit of a bummer. I just don't know how else to word it aside from saying I might not be able to commit insurance fraud with this one. Now I can do that just fine with DS. But oddly enough, the style the game goes for is something unique. The sprites in the backgrounds have a cleanish look to them, with just the right amount of color saturation, making it look leagues better than Super. I think the racers themselves are the best looking they've been up to this point. I mean, you were basically competing with cardboard cutouts. Some of the visual effects and stages, such as the Rain and Luigi circuit, make it one of the most appealing tracks in the game to look at. It filled the entire criteria list in one fell swoop. But that's just one of the tracks. Most of them look alright. There are some standouts, which I'll get to later, but not many of the tracks make good use of the GBA's hardware in an exciting way. While there are some appealing tracks in here, they aren't as good or abundant as that of 64. And I'm still talking about the graphic design here. I'll complain more about the lack of track variety later. But for now, just focusing on how there isn't much variety in the graphics of each course makes the whole game blend together in my mind. I know there are multiple Bowser's castles in this game, but if they made each one quite a bit different from each other graphically, maybe it wouldn't have been so noticeable. And I'm talking about more than just making the floor blue. But how exactly does this game match up with its predecessor? Because while this game is obviously the most similar to Super, it does take several keys from 64. Not only does it have the same character roster, but the models look surprisingly similar, and the same voice work is also carried over. The only one to get something new for himself was Yoshi. How lucky. But just comparing the entirety of Super Circuit to 64 is pretty unfair. I found Super Circuit to be a much more interesting game to go back and play, being the first truly portable Mario Kart, but 64 is just more fun to play. See, as horrible as that game treated me and my guts, I have a specific admiration for it because of what it did for the series. It was the first 3D game in the series, its multiplayer was on point, and the graphics still hold up well today. Yeah, so does the Ottoman Empire. But in hindsight, it's very obvious that Super Circuit wouldn't be anywhere near the quality of 64. One of the most important facts I've learned in life is that portable games are typically weaker when matched up with the consoles of that generation, and sometimes even the previous one. We wouldn't be able to reach the quality of 64 games on handheld until the DS, and the GBA was more like a portable SNES. One of my main problems with the console is the fact that it's too much like the SNES. Having similar graphics and dozens of ports on the system, it makes the GBA feel like one big identity crisis, leading back to Super Circuit. This was doomed from the start. I understand why it needed to be made. Mario Kart shouldn't be locked under a roof for all eternity. It needs to get out and see the world, and for that alone, it gets a leg up on 64. It might not be on par with its style or graphics or even its fun factor, but for being on a far inferior console, it did a bang up job. But who cares about compliments when you got coins? Probably the 1%. Being absent in 64, coins make their grand return as a very slight speed boost to all those who collect them. And this game is probably where they're the most important, as getting 100 in each cup is required in order to unlock the extra cups. It is a bit of a slight irritation, but it isn't like it's much of a hard task. It's one of the more unique criteria for unlocking cups, and I like that this game shakes things up a bit. And this would be the last time we see coins for another few years, because there isn't as much as a whisper of them for throughout the rest of the 2000s. On to less important matters, the controls. The game controls just about as well as it looks, which means they haven't fixed the drifting yet, so disregard any positive things I might say about this game. But this is to be expected. If they were actually able to fix the drifting in this game, I'd start questioning the world around me, if the game's Metacritic score wasn't already enough to trigger that. One thing this game can wave around is its gargantuan amount of tracks. There are a whopping 40 of them inside this guy, which is insane, until you step back, stop squinting, and realize there are 7 Bowser castles in the game. This game reuses assets and level themes constantly. It makes some of the better Bowser castles less interesting because guess what? It has 6 identical twins. What kind of parent would give their children numbers? It's a good thing to know that there's going to be a sequel. Half the game is just a recreation of Super Mario Kart. In typical GBA fashion, this game takes whatever it can from its SNES counterpart. I have to give this game some credit though. They had the dignity to rebuild Super Mario Kart within an entirely different game. Most SNES titles made their jump via straight up remakes, which was fine, but I think this concept is way cooler. So really, there are only 20 Super Circuit tracks. But I will give this game even more credit because some of the tracks have interesting themes that allow them to stand out from the rest. Sky Garden, Ribbon Road, Snowland, regrettably. And many of these more interesting tracks would go on to be remade in Mario Kart 8 to incredible results. Even some of the more questionable tracks chosen from this game are still fun, which shows that the track design in this game is great. It just isn't that fun when this is what you're playing it on. And this once again brings up the 2D versus 3D debate, because while this style can be done well, making it in 3D helps increase the scale of the tracks and gives it more of a sense of direction. And I feel it's pretty unfair for Super Circuit. Like, it shouldn't be deemed as subpar because it isn't as visually exciting or as original as most of the other entries in the series. I mean, how good can a portable Mario Kart game really be? We'll get to this. But my large problem with the game is the type of Mario Kart it tries to emulate. And I'm not talking about being 2D rather than 3D, I'm talking about how this game hates my guts. You see, while future games in the series would opt to have a more wacky take on things, where carts are flying around because of the fun items and the CPUs don't cheat, because after all, why would they? I've been trying to figure out this one for years. In all 3 of these games, the CPUs are unnecessarily difficult to get a leg up on. You can try as much as you like, but they will always be right behind you, waiting to pelt you with a red shell. And when you fall behind, you have to earn your way back up through the ranks. This sort of AI is present in later titles, but it never reaches this degree of excess that these 3 games brought down on my soul. It just makes the game inaccessible to anyone who wants to jump in and out for some Mario Karting fun. How long has that been there? Later games in the Mario Kart series properly balance out the skill and chaos of the core gameplay. And when you don't do that, you either have a game like Mario Kart Wii, which throws every trick in the book at you, making the game so chaotic it can easily be called unfair. Or you have a game like Super Circuit, which is all about skill and outmaneuvering your opponents, but it comes at the cost of not being much of a thrilling experience or a decently fun time with friends. And on that subject, the multiplayer is... Wait, there's multiplayer? While there is multiplayer in this game, it's easily the most difficult to get going. You need all of these cords, multiple systems, several copies, and numerous victims. And doing all that just for this is asking for a bit much. I already have my hands full with the IRS. Do you really need me to worry about the moral ethics of link cables too? But the thing that hurts this game the most doesn't lie within the game itself, it rests on the basis of Mario Kart DS. Both of these games released within a few years of each other, but it doesn't feel like it at all. Mario Kart DS is the perfect balance between skill and chaos that this game should have been. DS is quite literally everything Super Circuit wasn't. Every track was unique, it has a style of its own, it controls perfectly, it brought portable Mario Kart into 3D, the items have a lot more to them, and it brings the series forward in a way that Super Circuit simply doesn't. None of this makes Super Circuit a lesser game. The graphical capabilities of the DS are far greater than the GBA, but it definitely makes it look weak in comparison. Super Circuit is a fine game. I just don't think there's any need to go back to it. That applies to most Mario Karts, each one typically replaces the last, but it would be stupid not to recognize that each one added something to the series that made that game memorable for its time in its own right. And Super Circuit doesn't do any of that. It's the only Mario Kart that I'd argue didn't need to happen. DS could have been the first portable entry in the series, and no one would bat an eye. This game could have been good, but whether it was the limitations of the hardware or the developers shoveling out rushed work, this game was prevented from being the game it should have been. Because it's clear to me more than ever now that the really good tracks stand out. Most of them have been remastered, and they make for some of the best tracks in those games. If every track was like that, maybe this would have been more fun. If they had balanced out the fairness of the game, I'd be able to pick it up and enjoy it. If they had just put in a little more effort here and there, this would be a game worth revisiting. but it isn't. It's better than Super Mario Kart, but it doesn't matter. I'm still gonna revisit that game much more often because it started it all, and it will always be loved because of that. I feel horrible for Super Circuit because I wanted to enjoy this game, but there's just too many little elements with its gameplay that I have problems with, to the point where I can't call it legitimately fun. This is my least favorite Mario Kart game. It doesn't have anything special or worthwhile, it just sort of happened, and that's the most interesting thing about it. And you know, this is really starting to get on my nerves.